On January 6, 2026, a trust holding President Donald Trump's assets purchased between $500,000 and $1 million worth of stock in Nvidia. 8 days later, the Trump administration approved the sale of Nvidia's H200 artificial intelligence chips to China. Those chips represented billions of dollars in potential revenue for Nvidia. The company had spent years lobbying Washington to loosen export restrictions. The timing immediately raised questions. Was this simply a coincidence? Or does it highlight a larger problem? What happens when a president's personal financial interests overlap with government policy? I'm Darisse Smith, an independent journalist. This is the Journalism of Everything. One of President Donald Trump's main priorities in his second term is to make the U.S. dominant for the future of AI. And I agree that the U.S. must adopt responsible and progressive AI policies in order to compete in the world, because AI will be a major economic driver moving forward. My husband is a software engineer, and we have discussions about AI and the future of it all of the time in my house. Today, we're following the money, the policy decisions, and the timeline surrounding Nvidia, China, and President Trump's financial disclosures. Act 1. Why Nvidia matters. Before we get into the timeline, let's talk about Nvidia. Nvidia is currently one of the most important companies in the world. Its specialized computer chips power much of today's artificial intelligence revolution. Companies developing large language models, autonomous systems, advanced data analytics, and military AI applications rely heavily on NVIDIA's hardware. At the center of NVIDIA is CEO Jensen Huang. Throughout 2025 and 2026, Huang argued that U.S. restrictions on selling advanced AI chips to China were hurting American companies and encouraging China to develop domestic competitors. Biden actually did restrict a lot of our exports of AI chips. In other words, NVIDIA wanted access to the Chinese market. And that brings up the timeline. The timeline. So let's walk through the timeline. Because when we're talking about conflicts of interest, timing matters. And the timing here is what caught my attention. December 2025. President Trump signs an executive order designed to accelerate America's development of artificial intelligence. The order argues that the United States is in global competition with China for AI dominance, and that excessive regulation could slow American innovation. At roughly the same time, Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang is actively lobbying the administration. Huang had spent years arguing that restrictions on AI chip exports to China were hurting American companies and encouraging China to develop its own competitors. For Nvidia, China represented a massive market. And for the Trump administration, AI leadership has become a major policy priority.
Yes, sir. This is pass-fail As you said, this is the biggest technological innovation in our country's history. We've seen the canals, we've seen the railroads, we've seen the utilities, we've seen the build out of the internet and the fiber, and now it's AI, and it is pass fail versus China. We have the lead, we've got to maintain it, and it is also going to be the single biggest source of economic growth.
Now, fast forward a few weeks. January 6th, 2026. According to President Trump's annual financial disclosure, a trust holding his assets purchased between $500,000 and $1 million worth of Nvidia stock. Now, let me be very clear here. There is no public evidence that Donald Trump personally ordered this stock purchase. Trump has repeatedly said that investments are managed through trust arrangements and outside managers. But regardless of who placed the order, the investment appears on a financial disclosure tied to the president's assets. And that means that the timing is worth examining. Over the next several days, Nvidia continues pressing for broader access to the Chinese market. The company argues that if American firms are prevented from selling advanced AI technology abroad, foreign competitors will simply fill the gap. Then comes January 14th. Just 8 days after the Nvidia stock purchase appears on Trump's financial disclosure timeline, the Commerce Department approves the sale of Nvidia's H200 chips to approved Chinese customers. Now, what exactly is an H200 chip? You don't need an engineering degree to understand why this matters. The H200 is one of Nvidia's advanced artificial intelligence processors. It's designed to power large language models, data centers, and the kinds of AI systems that governments, corporations, and researchers increasingly rely on. In simple terms, this is the type of technology helping drive the AI revolution. And China wanted access to it. The administration argued that the newest and most powerful chips would remain restricted. I see often from the administration, they say, well, this isn't even the most advanced one, so that's why it's okay. Supporters said that the policy struck a balance between national security and economic competitiveness, but critics were not convinced. Investors, however, liked the news. Nvidia's access to the Chinese market represented billions of dollars in potential sales. And as the policy became public, Nvidia stock moved higher. And that's where critics began asking difficult questions. Not because anyone had proven wrongdoing, but because the sequence was just impossible to ignore. A Trump-controlled trust buys Nvidia stock. Days later, the administration approves a policy that benefits Nvidia. And then Nvidia's prospects improve. Again, timing alone is not proof of misconduct. But timing is often what investigators look at first. While there is nothing specifically in writing with Trump admitting that he personally bought Nvidia stock 1 week before the Commerce Department approved the sale of the Nvidia H200 chips to China, not only did he purchase a significant amount of stock in Nvidia before this decision, this agreement gives China an AI chip that gives it a significant military advantage. Despite his tough talk on limiting China's power in the world, Trump handed them the technology to become a supreme military superpower and made a lot of money in the process. By late January, President Trump publicly defends the decision. His argument is straightforward. America must win the AI race, and I do not disagree with this. American companies need to remain globally competitive. And if the United States refuses to sell AI technology abroad, China will simply turn to their own domestic alternatives. The administrative's message was essentially this: restrict Nvidia too aggressively, and you may end up helping Chinese competitors instead. The debate continues into February. Commerce officials insist that the approved chips are not Nvidia's most advanced products. They argue that safeguards remain in place and that the policy protects both economic interests and national security. But by March, Congress begins asking questions. Lawmakers want to know why the approval was granted when it has been restricted for quite a long time, what risks were considered, and whether the administration adequately explained its decision-making process. Then another development appears in the financial disclosures: additional Nvidia purchases, some valued between $1 and $5 million. Supporters argue that these investments were handled through trust arrangements and do not prove presidential involvement. Critics respond that the appearance of a conflict remains. And that brings us back to the central question: not whether Nvidia benefited, it clearly did. Not whether Trump personally ordered stock purchases. There is currently no public evidence showing that. The real question is whether Americans have enough transparency to know when public policy and private financial interests begin to overlap. If you enjoy this content, please hit the subscribe button. To be clear, there is currently no public evidence that President Trump personally directed Nvidia stock purchases based on non-public government information. There is also no public evidence that the Commerce Department approved Nvidia exports because of Trump's investments. But there is something else that matters in government ethics: appearances. Americans expect presidents to make decisions based on the national interest. When a president's financial disclosures show investments in a company and that company benefits from a major government decision days later, questions are inevitable. Supporters of the administration argue that the investments were managed through trust arrangements and that the policy was necessary to keep the United States competitive in the global AI force. Again, I don't disagree with a more aggressive stance with AI and American dominance with that technology. Critics argue, though, that the timing alone warrants scrutiny and demonstrates why stronger conflict of interest safeguards may be necessary. Ultimately, the question isn't whether Nvidia benefited. It obviously did. The question is whether the public has enough transparency to know where America's interests end and a president's personal financial interests begin. And that's a question worth asking regardless of who occupies the White House. I am Darisse Smith, an independent journalist. This is the Journalism of Everything. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing. I am a one-woman show doing all of the episode creation, which is all the research, writing the scripts, recording, and editing, all by myself. I am also a wife and a mother, and I have an active life outside of this. I appreciate all of your support.